Hello, everyone. I am Luke Reinhardt. Welcome to Closing the Gap, a podcast dedicated to your growth. Brought to you by Wellspring Coaching Services and hosted by myself and my wife, Katie. You know, people have gaps that prevent them from growing. Our goal is to empower you to close those gaps by increasing your awareness, confidence, and clarity. Join us today as we help you close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 13.
Hello.
We're going to pick up our conversation on story today.
Yeah.
Our last podcast was about the value of story, and there is so much value in this conversation, and we function so much by story that we just kind of want to keep this conversation going a little bit, go a little deeper with it.
Yeah.
In the last podcast, you know, we take note on the fact that we are easily inspired, discouraged, filled with joy, filled with sadness or sorrow, through good story. And stories can bring those emotions up for us that we sometimes have trouble bringing up ourselves, whether it be through movies, books, even watching sports, kind of putting yourself in that story of the sport as like the champion or the hero. We so long for a good story.
We do.
And function from it. So we want to keep going with that today and kind of picking up with different kinds of stories a little bit today.
Yeah. So we talked too about stories and storytellers and how the function of story and culture is really to like preserve tradition, to carry on maybe moral teachings. And it's really important to acknowledge that we all sort of create stories about ourselves. We have stories that we live in that relate to our families, that relate to our particular culture. As Americans, we have certain stories that we resonate with. You know, we know about Paul Revere and George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., people who've really, really made our American identity what it is, right? Yeah. And we have, so in some sense, and we should note, we're getting some of this information that we're presenting today from Oliver DeMille in his book on leadership. So I want to give credit to that. We've talked a lot about story. It's showing up everywhere too, Luke. I've showed you like articles where it's like I'm seeing this more, people are talking about it more, but it's something that as homeschoolers, we've like lived around books. We sort of have a philosophy that combines a couple things, but one of them is like how vital story is to our everyday learning. And we've used that a lot in teaching our kids. And I realized too how much I resonate with story and how important it is. So there's like a personal connection to this piece. But we definitely wanted to like talk into a little bit more about how story, it's not really something that you have to agree with us on. It's just kind of a reality that you do have a story that you live in. Like I am blah, 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 right? And we see that in coaching, that you have a story that you're living into.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, often we have, you know, maybe two groups of people where it's like some people have this victim story.
Yes.
And other people have this hero story.
Yeah.
Right? And the victim story may be true, and it may be false. The hero story may be true, and it may be false. But we're all telling ourselves a story based on certain life events and how we interpret those life events.
Right. Yeah. And even there's okay, I see the dichotomy you're presenting, but also there's like this gray area in the middle of like I'm unimportant. Like my story doesn't even matter, right? And that, I mean, we would both, right, you know.
But isn't that kind of a victim story in a sense?
A little bit, yeah, it is.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it could be. Some people don't carry it forward as if they've been hurt. Yeah, maybe you're right. Yeah, it's sort of this benign. I think of it as like this benign gray area that I'm floating around, and they don't acknowledge the fact that you are part of a bigger story. Yeah. Right? So they might not be telling and acting like they're victimized. They just feel invisible. Right? And that's if you're listening to us, you know, and you're feeling that way, I just want to say you do matter. You're really important. You matter a lot. And you're part of a bigger story. And I think it's really important to say that to yourself, to acknowledge that. And then to realize that you have something to contribute, and how you contribute matters. So today, I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but do you want to add to that?
Well, I was just going to say, too, just how, kind of what we're getting into today. We've kind of talked about it before in the form of diet and some other topics where you kind of have these two categories of healthy and unhealthy.
Right.
And it comes down to the same thing with story. You
Right.
have kind of healthy stories and unhealthy stories.
Right.
And recognizing what kind of stories you're taking in.
Right.
And how that's going to affect your own personal life story. So if you're taking in unhealthy stories, then it's going to affect your life story. And your life story might seem more unhealthy. You might have more of that victim mindset in what you're telling yourself.
Yeah, or perpetrator mindset. So there's different types of stories, and we're just going to go through those a little bit right now. And the first type is what we call twisted. We've heard it identified as bent, but I kind of like twisted better.
Me too.
We think this is a better term, just for how we think about it. But a twisted story is the idea that, good is evil and evil is good. So the whole narrative becomes shifted. And what those kind of stories do in your life is they tend to foster feelings of hatred, negativity. They're not productive stories to live in. So they take you out of a place of lovingness, and they create more of a tendency towards unloving behavior. Example, pornography, horror movies, right? What they leave you with and what they're fostering and promoting is twisted. That's just the best way to talk about it.
Yep.
The next type we want to talk about are broken stories. And broken stories include a narrative where good is good and evil is evil. It's clearly identified. And we know good story also has a climax and a resolution. In broken stories, the resolution is evil wins. So at the end of it, we feel kind of let down because it doesn't feel right. It's not how we wanted it to end.
Yeah, I've never watched a movie or read a story where it's like you have the hero and the villain and the villain wins and you feel good about it.
Right.
And
in those stories, it's important to identify that we knew that he was the villain or she was the villain all along in the story. It was never unclear, but that they won the day, right? Yeah. So stories, like a childhood story, maybe The Lord of the Flies, thinking like George Orwell's 1984 or Communist Manifesto. Some of these things are classic literature that would fall in that category of broken. So it didn't come out right. We didn't get a healing or wholeness, which leads us to the third type of story, which is I'm calling wholesome stories. Some people call it just whole stories, but wholesome stories where good is good and evil is evil and the good wins. So we feel good about that. We always we want to cheer at the end. We're so happy. We leave that story feeling rejuvenated. We've fostered a sense of goodness, and we want to have that same tendency, like you're saying, the hero. Like we want to be the hero. We want it to end well. We can walk away with that from that story. We might have cried a little in the story, but we certainly don't walk away feeling gut punched. Yeah. Yeah.
And we live by this so much and long for this so much that, as we were saying in our last podcast, I mean, even good marketing is based on this.
Yes.
Wholesome stories.
Right. We want that so badly. And we can't help but live into a story scenario. So like we're writing papers, if you write a paper, right now I'm doing several papers with my kids at the end of the school year. And, there's elements of good story where you set up the characters and you set up the setting and that's sort of the beginning. And then there becomes this this problem that happens, and then there's this like climax to the problem, and then the last bit is the resolution, and the resolution of the whole story feels really good. We like it. We feel content. We feel satisfied, and so with these three types of stories that we have, which ones would you say you want to draw away from, and which ones do you want to draw near to?
Well, of course, we want to draw near to the wholesome stories.
Okay.
I mean, I think we all do that naturally, and the other ones, the
twisted,
bent or twisted stories, just they give us sometimes that feeling of like, maybe you like to have that feeling of fear or, but what do you get out of it in the end is what we're saying, right? Like maybe it's a little bit of a rush or something like that, right? Adrenaline and things like that. But there's also healthy ways to do that, right? So not every way to get a rush or to get an adrenaline or to even, suspense or whatever it may be, a bent story or a twisted story is not necessarily a healthy way to do that. Yeah. And it doesn't get you thinking and functioning in a wholesome way either. Right. So
we're creating these stories that we resonate with tend to affect our character, is what we're kind of saying, So it's like you create, I've heard it said, Oliver DeMille in his book that I referenced earlier talks about it, you create a canon. So it's basically the standard of truth that will come through in the stories that you surround yourself with and the ones that you consume. And so we're kind of bringing this topic up to help you and help ourselves to evaluate, how much time am I spending in these twisted stories? Hopefully not much.
And we have to recognize that life can be twisted. Yeah. Right? And it can be bent and it can be broken. And when I'm saying there's those two stories of victim and hero, you may be a victim, right?
No, that's a reality.
There's definitely, we're all victims of something, but in the end, like when we watch a good movie, we see someone, maybe they're victimized, maybe they're the victim of the story, but in the end, they become the hero, right? And so the things that you take in, once again, whether it be through reading or watching movies or even listening to music.
Story with melody.
Yeah. It's, it kind of dictates how you write your own story and how you see life.
It does. And also the people you're with and the stories they're telling, right? Because we're so communal. We tend to interact with humans on a regular basis, and the story, what are the stories around us that people are sharing? Are they sharing stories saying, hey guys, listen, I did this, and this, it didn't turn out well for me. Please do something different. Yeah. Or are they living into victim stories? Are they living into hero stories? What's going on, and how much time am I spending in that space too?
And I think it's important to really recognize the core of this, because you might be thinking, oh, well, I like watching horror movies, okay? And, I used to watch them in the past. I haven't really watched one since we've been married, just because when we first got married, there's no way, right? Yeah. But I've also learned in that time, even though I enjoyed watching them, I did learn to understand the twisted nature of them. And, but in any case, you may feel that way. But if we look at this from a sports perspective real quick, we
always bring it back to
it's very rare, just because it kind of like, it's easier to relate, I think. It's very rare that, you watching a movie or you're watching a season of sports and you have the underdog, let's just talk about Rocky for a second. It wouldn't have been nearly as good if Rocky lost every time, right? It just would not
There'd be a Rocky one.
Or if your favorite basketball team, when they lose, if they're the underdog and they're coming up, and then the championship comes and then they just get demolished. It's not nearly as exciting. It's not what we root for. No. Right?
Naturally, we don't. Yeah.
We don't root for that naturally. Right. So we root for that champion. We root for the hero. Yeah. And, that's the good side.
Yeah. And we want the team that worked the hardest, that, I don't know, maybe I'm being projective in the sense, but I like to see a team win or a person win that I know worked really hard, and they have a good intention with this, and they've put in the sweat and the blood and the tears and all of that, and then they win.
Yeah.
Or they came, like, here, stories of people who've come out of impoverished situations where they had rough beginnings and then made something really amazing out of their life to serve others. Like, I love those stories. Why? Because they've taken, like, a broken situation, a story that might be broken, and they've turned it into whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've converted it. So that is a beautiful thing. And we would call a collection of your whole stories and possibly some broken stories that you resonate with, that have helped you to become a little bit more transformational in society or with your own life, that these are part of your healing process, right? Use those stories. It's a beautiful thing to take something that you see as broken and transform it into something good. I think to balance that, most of us do need some wholesome stories too that we live into. Some really good was good, evil was evil, and good won. We need that as, like, the background narrative that's going on.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you are looking for positive changes in your life, then I do believe that, reading, watching, listening to wholesome stories is kind of a starting place for beginning those positive changes, because they do inspire, they do encourage, they give you strength, they give you hope.
Yep. And depending on what your background was, if there was a lot of twistedness, a lot of brokenness, you may need to surround yourself intensely with wholesome stories. You may not even be able to engage even with broken stories yet, because you need to do some rebuilding, some healing work, and being aware of that. It's fine to say, listen, I can't watch that. I can't listen to that. I need to separate myself from that. And to put those boundaries and barriers up, and being aware of that, because our goal in coaching, and we're offering this content through podcast, is getting people from point A to point B. All of us get stuck, and all of us find ourselves in the mud. And some of the best way to really move is to then put ourselves into places and surround ourselves with a story that builds goodness, that reminds us of truth, and being really selective about that.
Yeah.
It's an important topic.
It creates a form of meditation. What you read, what you listen to, the kind of music that you listen to, those lyrics and those stories they turn in your head.
Yes.
Right? So
true.
If you're listening to bent and twisted music or watching bent and twisted movies, that is going to repeat.
Yep.
Subconsciously even.
Even if you think you're fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's telling you a story over and over and over again. Yeah. And if you're telling yourselves bent and twisted stories all the time, then it is going to affect the way that you live and the way that you view life. Yeah. And if you're listening to wholesome stories, then that's going to affect you in a positive manner. Yeah. And even within wholesome stories, twisted things happen.
Sure.
Right? There's broken things and there's twisted things that happen within a wholesome story. Yep. The difference is the end result of the story.
Yes. Good point. I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
Because it's not like we're trying to avoid dark
there's going to be dark things.
Yeah, there's plenty of wickedness and evil to go around. Yeah. And that's a part of life, and we need to be used to that, and we need to be prepared for that. Yeah. And trained for that even. Yeah. But in the end, the wholesome story is when maybe these things happen, but there's victory in the end. Yeah. There's victory of good over evil. Yeah. In the end, there's you become the hero. Yeah. In the end of the story. And
one thing we find with all the topics we've addressed in these podcasts, and just human nature and the way we've we've in working with people and in our own lives, our experiences, that one good choice leads to another good choice, leads to another good choice. And following that sort of upward spiral is, use the momentum of that. You watch something good, you do something good, you listen to something good, you talk to somebody in a positive way, and you just kind of create that. If everybody kind of falls down the spiral here and there, we might get a bump or a hit and we go backwards, but not letting it go down, down, down. This is why we like the image of the twisted, because of the spiraling nature. But, working towards, hey, we want to rise, we want to overcome, we want to have that victory in the end. And so remembering that, making that one good choice, and we use the analogy of diet, one good positive choice usually leads to, okay, well, I'm going to go run today. Oh, well, I think I'm going to eat healthy because I don't want to ruin what I just did, and all these kinds of things. And when you get exposed, or say you're in a season of life or in a situation where there's a ton of brokenness around you, or there's a ton of even twistedness that's coming up, is really important to filter and realize, like, okay, I need to spend some more time in this wholesome story. Like, I need to kind of make sure that the conversations I'm having, the narratives I'm hearing, watching, listening to, are definitely pushing good, the narrative of good, right? Like, I want to be in the loving narrative. I want to be working towards wholeness. And the more I put myself in that space, the more I can offer that to others too. Yeah. And that's such a blessing.
So I think it's good to evaluate this and ask yourself, what kind of story?
Yes.
What kind of stories are you consistently consuming?
Yeah.
Once again, whether that be through reading books, watching movies, fiction or nonfiction.
Right.
Music. What kind of music are you taking in?
Right.
What are the lyrics? Pay attention. Sometimes the beat's nice, but the lyrics, not so nice.
Yeah.
And it's all telling a story.
And what story are you telling yourself? That's another exercise that you can do for those of you listening who are trying to actually, take some of this information and put it into like a practice, is write your story. Write down who you are, what your story is, how you see yourself, and then evaluate it. Ask others, does this seem like this is really true? Am I creating a realistic impression? Or take that opportunity to go, I want to change my story. I want to move in the direction of this character that I saw in this story, or some hero that we have really living right now in this time and space, right? Yeah. So we want to do that, and also understand that everything you're doing, that you're affecting every single person around you, everyone that you live with, and everyone that you encounter. Like, you have that potential to create a positive whole feeling, or you can create brokenness and twistedness for them as well. So you live not only for self, but for others, right? And so I guess the point of our podcast in many ways today is to just choose wisely your story.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us. And once again, take it as you want, but hopefully you can use some of these materials to help you get from where you are
to where you
want to be.